All right. I'm Allison Harrison, owner of ALH Law Group, and I am with Aaron Thomas of Prenups.com. Aaron, if you want to do a quick intro.
Sure. Aaron Thomas. I'm with Prenups.com. I'm a founding attorney. We write prenups to help couples stay married. We're in 34 states, probably in your state, and if not, we will be soon. Happy to have this conversation with you, Allison.
Yeah. And you're going to be in 50 states soon enough. So if it's one of the states you're not in, Aaron will figure it out and he'll be there. Amazing. Well, I thought we could talk about the interplay between estate planning and prenups and how that pans out, because I think it's something that can get ignored from the estate planning side, is people don't mention that they have prenups even though we ask. And so I think the very first thing is, when you're helping clients with prenups, do you have any discussion with them about, talk to your estate planning attorney kind of thing about this when they sign?
Yeah. It is part of our process. I mean, probably the same way that when someone says that they're getting married on your side, prenup, pops into mind as a potential suggestion. Estate planning comes up as part of the questions that we ask as part of the prenup process. We have a section in our prenup that addresses estate planning, but the way that I always explain it is, I tell my clients, because a lot of times people ask us, can we just put, we want to account for what happens if one of us passes away. We want to put, the estate planning provisions in our prenup. And the way that I always explain it is, a prenup is a two-party agreement. It is an agreement between you and your spouse. And so if that is going to be changed in the future, you both have to agree to it. And so you don't want to put estate planning provisions in your prenup, because an estate plan is a personal thing. And, life is not always going to happen on your legal document preparation schedule. And, there are certainly circumstances, some not even nefarious, right, where you may not want to leave your entire, estate to your spouse. You may be going through a divorce. You may be in the process of, getting divorced.
You might have kids from a prior relationship.
You may have kids from a prior relationship, or your partner could be independently wealthy. They could hit the lotto, or they're...
Yeah, I think I'm glad you say that. Every once in a while, we have some older couples who will come to us and they have a joint will. Nothing makes me want to pull my hair out more than that. Not necessarily because it was bad when they did it, but the problem is then if one person dies, you can't update it. And I think very much the same, I assume, Aaron, I don't do prenups, is if one person dies, right, there's not a modification to it. So if that's your estate planning doc and your spouse predeceases you very young, that can be incredibly difficult of how do I change this joint document when the other person's gone?
Yeah, I think one of the similarities for both of us is you want maximum flexibility. You want optionality in things. You don't want to be locked into something that you have a reasonable date it or change it, and you can't only because of the way that you set things up. I always say leave your prenup as the agreement between you and your spouse, and do the estate planning part separate. Now, one thing that we will do in prenups is put in a provision that says that both parties have an expectation that they're always going to share their estate plan with their spouse.
That's interesting.
That we're always going to have an up-to-date, so that both parties know what they're receiving from the other. So you don't have one person who they're leaving their entire assets to their spouse with the expectation that is reciprocal.
And it's not.
And it's not,
yeah.
Right? Because that could be awkward. And, our philosophy on prenups is...
And we have the same thing with estate planning. Very rarely do we do one individual without the spouse, only because when clients come to us and they want to do it without their spouse, a lot of times they need a divorce. The number of times we have had women come into our office and say, I want this and I don't trust my husband. And it's usually straight couples. They're I don't trust my husband with money. I want this. And I'm I can help you to a point, but I think what you actually need is a divorce, because if you don't trust your husband that much with money, there's a bigger conversation to be had other than reducing what they get should you pass first, because you're 40 and you're likely going to live a very long time. Do you ever have to dig into that with prenups? Because we run into it every once in a while. And I'm just curious.
Yeah. One of the great things about a prenup, and this is true in all 50 states, is for the prenup or postnup to be enforceable, those spouses have to disclose all of their assets and debts and income to each other. And we require that couples do that in writing. It's attached to the agreement. They initial each other's net worth schedules. So there's absolutely zero question And so we go into it, we explain to every client before they hire us that is one of the requirements, so that they go in knowing that, everything is going to be disclosed to each other. The enforceability of your agreement depends on it. And I had a client, or a potential client, did not end up being a client for reasons you'll discover in just a second, that came in, and when I explained that to him, said, "Oh, there's no way I could tell her what I've got." And, had to kind of very, judiciously and tactfully explain.
Yes, you do.
And that it's not going to be enforceable. And when you are getting married, I know you do not think about it as a financial merger. Think about it that this is an act of love and devotion on your part. It is
but it is a financial merger. It's literally, now you're a joint household, so you can live off of two incomes.
It is quite literally a financial merger. And we can define to what extent you are merging your finances. It is certainly acceptable, and there are perfectly good reasons to keep some things separate, on both sides, and define what's going to be in the hours column.
Yeah.
But in order to have that negotiation, ethically, and it's also just kind of good relationship advice to be open and honest with your spouse. Hopefully I'm not over tipping my bounds. I'm a lawyer, and not a counselor, but
right, we're lawyers and counselors, right? Attorney and counselor law, or whatever that oath is. I do think that's a huge part, is like explaining to people, if you're going into this legally binding relationship, you probably should have some transparency. Yeah, no, I don't do divorces. I do business divorces. And so a lot of times it's the lack of conversation when they start the business together. And I think very much you probably found this when you did divorce work, it's when they didn't have the conversations when they got married. Now they're headed towards divorce because those things are becoming more prevalent. That's what I see in business divorce cases.
Yeah. And as much as sometimes people recoil from the idea, I think that there are a ton of analogies between a business and a marriage. Obviously, no, your marriage is not a business entity. I call the prenup the operating agreement for your marriage. These things don't go wrong, they start wrong, right? And when people have money problems in their marriages, almost always a byproduct of a failure to communicate and get on the same page about, very critical things. And I'm sure it's the same in a business. We're friends. We're going to get along. We'll figure it all out.
Everyone thinks that. They're like, yeah, we'll do 50-50. That's a great idea. It's such an atrocious idea.
Most 50-50 business partnerships that I've seen should have been an employer and an employee.
100%.
Or an investor and, an operator.
Right. And it can be 50-50, but you have to have delineate who gets to make financial decisions, who gets to make the strategic decisions. I also think, from my own experience, that's part of a marriage, is who gets to make these decisions. And it may ebb and flow over time, but you need to be able to have the freedom to do that. My office team jokes that my wife and I have KPIs because we do sit down once a week and go through finances and calendar and a bunch of other things. So that we're on the same page, right? Then we don't have these issues.
Yeah. And you and I know each other. So you already know that I'm a huge fan of the intentional sit downs, the family meetings. These are healthy things. And, couples who don't sit down and have these conversations are also the same couples who go years or decades avoiding certain conversations, not discussing things. And then 30 years in, they're in, their divorce lawyer's office, and they're like, well, I never appreciated the way he handled the finances, or, I never approved of her investment strategy. And it's
you could have said something 30 years ago.
30 years ago, or any time in between then and the filing of your divorce paperwork. So to piggyback off of that, when we talk about estate planning with our clients, we actually want that intergenerational. So whatever the person is giving to the next generation, have the conversation. Because some of the things I think are either you have beneficiaries who think they're worth a lot more than they are, because they might have lived an extravagant lifestyle where they, had nice watches and handbags and things, but they didn't have anything in savings. And so you get these younger people, whether it's children or nieces and nephews or, chosen family, that think that they're going to inherit a ton, and they act incredibly irrational, or they have boatloads of money and no one knows. And so also it's a pain in the butt from a probate perspective when you pass away, to have the person who's getting
whatever it is they're entitled to, not know what it is. The amount of time as a probate attorney we spend just trying to find assets is astronomical. So I want to know, do you have one? Because do you delineate something as specifically your asset? Because I want to ask you questions about that. A lot of times when we have couples, the assumption is, and most couples want, hey, if I die, then to this person, to my spouse. If they pass, then to me. But occasionally, if we look at the prenup, there may be some carve out that like says this is ours and then this is mine, and it's supposed to go to like my children from like a previous relationship or what have you. And we just want to make sure we ask the question, because they had that intent at some point to not combine it. And we don't know if that intent is still there today or if that's changed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, similarly, when I work with my clients, one of the things I say, over and over and over is I never want you to be in a position where you're...
Oh, right. And we also want to do that. Like I have a huge issue with doing parts of an estate plan because then they don't talk to each other. And so that's why I think it's important to ask about a prenup, because I want to make sure that it's talking all to one another and we don't have conflicting stories, because that's when you end up in litigation. Is you have this thing that says this, you have this thing that says this, and now we got to try and figure out when the person's not here, which one was supposed to control.
And Ohio has post-nups now too, right?
Yes.
As
yeah.
of 2023?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So maybe some of those people don't have to necessarily get divorced if they're not on the same page. They have a middle ground option.
Aaron, that would require that they talk to each other about finances, and they are not, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But so we also do bring up prenups to a lot of our estate planning clients, because we get parents that are like, I love my future blank in law, but I don't want them to have everything. And I was like, that's totally fair. Have you talked to your children about getting a prenup? And I have done that once and it went horribly. They're like, what do you think, that our kids don't understand like how to talk to each other and you don't trust my blah, blah, blah in law? And I was like, I don't even know that person's name. So like I'm not passing judgment on either your child or your future in-law, but I'm just saying that seems to be a natural conversation to have, because frankly, you're worth a lot of money. And I would think that you have talked to your children, but I ended up sending them your book, your ebook, to be like, hey, look, I am not saying that this is distrust. I am just saying this is smart financial planning. And that seems to be something you care about. And it was so interesting just how they took it when I was bringing it up to protect what they wanted to give their children. And so I'm so thankful for what you do and how you pitch prenups, because it's truly how I approach it. Is it's just having a business plan before you enter into this agreement.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, and it really is. It's the older generation where they are offended. When you bring up the idea of
viscerally
a prenup or a postnup, because the stigma in the older generation is so deep. Luckily, and more younger people have, been moving away from the stigma of prenups, meaning that it's about distrust or that you're writing your divorce decree before you, even start your marriage.
Do you think that's because people are getting married at an older age play into it? Because I would think it does.
And this is kind of the way that I'll sometimes explain it is, when people in the 1960s, the average age of somebody getting married was 21. And their finances were very simple, and they didn't have, huge assets. They likely didn't have huge debts. Student loans weren't like they are. Ks hadn't even been invented. Credit cards were just coming around. I mean, just everything in terms of financial life was very simple. And when you get married at 20, you're kind of building your financial personality together. You
don't have like set ways of doing things yet because you're still so young.
Right. And then today, the average age of getting married is 30. Okay, 21 to 30 may not seem like the hugest difference in the world, but you think about the average 30-year-old today, not only is their individual financial life complex, they've got 2 401ks, they got an IRA, they got a small business, they got stock options, they got some equity in a condo, they got their own car, they got 4 or 5 credit cards, they got student loans, you've got, it is a true financial merger.
I would say you haven't even talked about like Zelle balances, crypto accounts, gold trading, like all of those other things that are newish.
Ridiculously complex, but more important than, the assets and the debts and the types of assets and debts that exist is the fact that since you left your parents' home at age 18, you've been managing your own finances for 10 to 12 years now. And you may be the kind of person who pays off your credit card monthly, and the other person, carries a balance. Like you may max out your 401k and they don't believe in it. They got everything invested in crypto and you're an index fund. So, trying to the assumption that you're going to get together and just slap all of that into, one cohesive lifestyle is just, it's not realistic. And people who get married, also 2-income households are more common than 1-income households. And so, whereas like, our parents may have grown up where everything was in one checking account and one parent maintained the checkbook, and that's just the way that it was. Today, people want to have their own money. People get married, they keep their separate accounts. People want to have their own spending money. And so, just figuring out, where does the money go? Does it go into a joint account, the incomes, or do they go into separate accounts and then you both contribute to a joint account? And just figuring out the logistics of how all that works is so much more complex. And I think that people recognize it and they think there's nothing wrong with me having an account with my own spending money in it, where I can do what I want with it. That's not an unhealthy thing for today's couple. Whereas, you can open up, a new checking account on your phone in probably 5 minutes. As our parents, our grandparents, they couldn't really do that.
Well, also, if you think about it, like our parents and our grandparents, women couldn't open up an account without a male cosigner, right?
They couldn't have credit cards.
They couldn't have credit cards. Yeah. So you had all of these women who literally could not have their own things without their father or their husband signing off on it.
Yeah. It's, and I'm glad you bring this up because, like, let's go there. This whole, so much of like the assumptions about what is supposed to happen in a marriage financially go back to some really outdated principles. So like, a couple getting married and like this idea that two people become one, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds very romantic. It sounds, super nice. And like, we're both, and people, I think, assume that means like we're bringing one half of both of us together.
It's definitely not.
The whole.
Yeah, that's definitely not what it used to mean.
And where that came from is the woman ceased to exist as a legal entity. It was usurped into that of the man. And that is like literally in like the law books of 150 years ago.
Oh my God, Aaron, I went to a wedding at a Baptist church near me and it was our neighbor who's a loud, outspoken woman. And like the entire ceremony was like, you will serve your husband, you will do all this. And this was in like 2010, maybe not that long ago. And I was like, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard because I've seen them as a couple. I know who's running the ship and it is not him. Right. And like, but you're correct like that. And that still kind of seeps into some pieces of today because that's what it was.
Absolutely. The like, I now introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. John Smith. Like that is.
Yes, you don't get your own name.
Right. That's the woman ceasing to exist. Yeah. The father giving away the bride at the wedding. And again, I get it's sweet. We're doing it as a like it's not meant to be, a symbol of.
I mean, it used to be, but we just have kept those traditions.
We've kept those traditions, but it is like that was the transfer of financial responsibility from a father to, a wife. And you own, this is now your property. Yeah. Is the way that it was treated. And we don't knowingly do that when we continue these traditions. But I do think it's important that people recognize where these things come from, because then the justification for, a woman not having her own bank account was also because, of course, the man owns everything because the woman is not a legal entity, in and of herself. So when you think about it from that perspective, like, of course it is, like people should have their own bank accounts. Of course you can define what's mine, what's yours, what's ours. And I think all of these things contribute to this generation's greater acceptance of like a prenuptial agreement, not even as a plan for divorce, but as like let's define the financial relationship. The same way that you have to define the relationship talk, let's have the define the finances talk.
And so I would just piggyback off of that. So like very similar to kind of the archaic foundation of, why our parents have this persona. We also have that in probate side of things. In every state, you have a spousal share. There's like a required amount you have to give your spouse. And the whole point behind that was so that women and children weren't left destitute when the husband died. Right? That is 100%. Ohio is one of very few states that still has dower right in real estate, which means as a wife, you have inherent rights into your husband's property. I find it like a fascinating legal like black hole, because what do we do when two women own real estate? I mean, technically, I still have to sign everything as a dower like spouse, but it doesn't derive from like the same rationale of like I wasn't a legal entity because it's two women getting married, right? And so like Ohio is, I think, one of 10 states that has dower right.
Yeah. I think people would be shocked to know how many of these laws are still on the books and why so Georgia has, if a spouse cheats, they're no longer eligible to receive alimony. And where that comes from, and a lot of people are like, fine with me, but where that comes from is the trade, the contract that is being made, the marital contract is, and of course, it was marriage back then was only a man and a woman. So it was the man providing financial support in exchange for the woman providing like exclusive access to her body, exclusive ownership, you could even say, of her body. And if she breaks her end of the contract,
you don't have to pay her.
Then you don't have to pay her.
Which is
you are absolved of your financial responsibility. I mean, and that is where that's still on the books.
Yeah.
And still enforced. It's not like one of those things on the books that's like, no, it is still enforced. And of course, today it can apply both ways, like any spouse that cheats is no longer, but
that's I love researching the genesis of where some of these laws come from. And then when I have to explain them to people who are like in their 30s or even their 20s, are like, what are you talking about? And I was like, yeah, no, this is still a thing. Like you have to do it and you have to release your dower interest. And they're like, this is insane. I'm like, sure is, but that's where we're at.
And when people get educated on it, when they learn about the justifications, like all of a sudden, because if you don't have your estate plan, if you don't have a prenup, you are leaving those important decisions up to the state. And when people learn, they're like, of course, I'm not going to trust the state to make these decisions.
You're like, have you seen the government lately? I don't want that. Yeah.
No, you know what? I will actually make those decisions for myself. We will make those decisions for ourselves, as a couple. Right?
Yeah. The thing that we also have to educate folks on, I think yours is a little different because like the prenup is, here's what happens if we no longer work out. But for us on doing the estate planning side of things, we have to tell people like the will's great. Everyone hears about the will, but like one, there's no reading of the will that happens in a mahogany desk office. Like there shouldn't be. You should know ahead of time.
Right.
But two, you still have to probate it if all you did was a will. And like that is the biggest misconception. And arguably having a will makes the probate process longer. Because now we have to give people notice of the will and we have to give people the opportunity to object to it. And we have to do all these things. If we didn't have a will and just a will, we would just say like, here's what the statute says. Okay, let's move forward. There's not the opportunity to contest. There's not as many notices required. There's not a hearing about it. Like all of these things can get fast tracked if you avoid that. So it's like, if you want to avoid stress on your family, it better be more than a will.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe there's a 50% chance you get divorced. Guess what? There's a 100% chance that you are going to die. And if you have anything left on this earth, something's got to happen with it. That process is going to go through one way or another.
And it's getting more complex because the thing that I think a lot of people forget about are your digital footprint. And so I'm actually curious, do you plan in your prenups for the digital footprint? Because we have to walk through like, how do you nominate someone to like close down your Facebook account and your LinkedIn and your Gmail and your Apple ID and all of those things? Do you have like a plan for that when you do prenups?
Not typically, because again, it's an agreement between spouses. So when we touch on digital footprint, it's like, restrictions on, when you break up. Are there restrictions on you going and blabbing about, the
interesting
on social media, right? Like,
yeah.
Very common to put confidentiality clauses in prenups pertaining to, you're exchanging all your financial information. You shouldn't be able to go and take somebody's net worth statement and post it on the internet, right? That's something that is like standard in most prenups, but it is starting to become more standard to like, your if you're a business owner or a public person or a private person, somebody going and posting their, private details about the downfall or the demise of your relationship on social media ends up being like a very serious thing with, wide-ranging implications and repercussions. And so, people want to agree up front, when you see celebrities get divorced and they put out a joint statement about how much they respect each other and it's all like good and nice. Like that didn't happen by accident. People are insisting that, that be part of their agreement and that there's penalties if you go against that rule. It is something I'm in favor of myself.
No, I think that makes sense. Like you want to have some control of the narrative, especially because I think a lot of, at least what you specifically, Aaron, handle within prenups are like high net worth individuals. That's a reputational risk that could have serious financial repercussions if it is negative.
Right. And think about relationships that have gone poorly between like celebrity breakups and like, the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, like, and it wasn't even their divorce that went to court. It was like the defamation and the
Yeah.
like, writing articles and going public, with your story. And like, then there's the tell all books, that come out. And, if if your reputation impacts your financial future, in no area or no industry is that more true than arts and entertainment.
Oh, yeah.
You can be talking about tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of a difference in your career earning opportunities because you didn't have a confidentiality clause in your prenup.
Yeah.
And it happens.
Council or the mayor of your town or any of those things, or you have the aspirations to do that, you would want something like this in there just in case. Like I feel like the thing we don't know is, where does life take us? Meaning you can't control what your spouse does, right? And you may be an amazing partner and your spouse might not, right? But you still don't want that out there because it hurts both of you if it gets out publicly.
On you. Yeah. And even if you're not, running for office, you could be running a local business, and that can come impact, like if your community is small, if you live in a town of 2,500 people,
Yeah.
and somebody goes and blabs to the church community and like
you don't want those church ladies.
Conference. Now you got to move.
You don't want the church ladies gossiping about you.
Exactly. Put that in my prenup, please.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting, I think, how we have to look at these things. So like we do our estate planning, we ask like, how do you want your death announced? Do you have control over it? Do you care? Some people don't. Like I have a family friend who fairly wealthy. He was like, if you know me, you'll know I'm dead. Please don't put an obit in. And like that is explicit. Her whole family knows. Like, and I think it's really interesting. We also give people like the option, do you want to write your obituary? If you want to, we'll make sure that your executor knows like that's going in the paper. That's what you want. On a Facebook post, you don't. So you have control because like you're dead, you can't make decisions, right? Like we have to plan for what would you want. We also think that's a gift. Then your family doesn't have to think about it. Yep. And I would think too, Aaron, kind of in the flip side for prenups of you're already going through an emotional time because you're getting divorced. You don't have to think about it. You wrote that when you were both on a level, emotional, logical thinking playing field. And anytime there's change in your life, one of those two, either emotions or logic, get out of whack.
Yeah, no, I love what you said about it being a gift. Like your passing is already going to be, extremely hard on your loved ones and those people around you. And being able to save them even just a little bit of pain with an action that you can take ahead of time. If you just, do the responsible thing. And it's the same thing, like a prenup is a gift to your future self. It's a gift to your spouse. It is, to me, sometimes I'll say it is a commitment to say, let's do these things while we're absolutely in love so that like, I'm protecting you from my future emotions, so that like, I don't have the ability to opt out. I'm willing to commit myself to be fair to you, even if I don't like you anymore. Like, that's why I say,
it's so true.
The most romantic gesture you could pay to, your future spouse by taking, the emotions of the breakup off the table. I always say there's two divorces. There's the divorce, which is the breakup. It's the end of the relationship that you thought was going to last the rest of your life. And that's already difficult enough. Then there's the second divorce. It's the divorce case, meaning the lawsuit that gets filed with the court. And the first divorce is already tough enough. You don't need to make, the public courtroom lawsuit divorce any more difficult than it has to be. And you can just you can take it off the table with a little bit of like, planning ahead of time, just like you would with a will, make things easier for the people that you love with some planning ahead of time.
Yeah, no, it's 100. I mean, I think we're both in the plan ahead business, right? Because we do probate, right? We help when there's not a plan that's gone well. And I feel horrendous for these people. It's like 4 years later that their parent has died and they're still navigating it, or their spouse died 2 years ago. And it's like, I want to give these folks a fresh beginning, like let you move on. You've already had to suffer the like emotional loss of someone. And now you're just in the drudgery of like logistics and court and paperwork, and you've already done enough, right? Like, I think by having the plan, like as me, it's a gift to the next generation of like, they can mourn me and then they can have my money, but like they don't have to do like this 3-year stretched out period where they're like, I loved my aunt, but this is a really big pain in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as much as I think you and I are like proud of our abilities to do what we do on a legal front in serving our clients, no one's ever come to me and said, I would really like a long, drawn out legal process at a vulnerable point in my life.
I love talking to my attorney so much that I would like to see them for 3 years when I am a little unstable. Yeah. No one has said that ever. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciated it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me around. Anytime.